Hello YouTube, welcome to the first of my JP retrospectives. This time I'll be covering the first half of the month of August. I actually decided that the way that I want to do this is to cover each burst cycle individually rather than try and do the entire month at one time, which kind of, I guess, I don't want to say artificially extends the length of the video, but it's a lot of information to take in all at once, and it's easier to digest in smaller pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the events of August, specifically the Zack burst cycle. So let's get into it. So to start with, I just want to say that here in the portion of the game where we're getting the C90s on JP, the one thing that's kind of like the unifying factor with all of the reworks and the LDs and stuff like that we're seeing is that all of the characters, and I'm not a big fan of this, all of the characters get the same general group of upgrades for their, like on their EX passives, or on their LD or somewhere in their kit, which can be summed up as higher, potencies on their skills, more brave hits, more overflow, more HP dumps, like brave dumps, and then refund and battery in between each of those dumps. So basically, everybody hits harder, they hit more times. That's kind of the gist of it, and then everyone gets some form of brave damage up, or HP damage up, or brave gained up, or overflow up, somewhere in there as just like a passive, right? Which helps bring a lot of characters up to snuff really easily, but also it makes kits a lot more samey, It brings a lot of homogeneity to the game when all of your characters kind of sort of do very similar things. It's not exactly the same, but pretty similar. That's actually why this has taken so long, because as I started doing research on all of this, it's really just kind of dull. It's not that interesting to review and go over. But anyway, let's get started. So to start with, we're going to kick things off with, we'll start with Trey. Trey got a rework here so that his skill 1, his follow-up, I think it's raining arrows, or arrow shower, excuse me. His arrow shower is now a full AoE HP dump, which is great for his damage output because essentially it doubles it, or triples it in the case of a 3-enemy fight, so that it's no longer split. This is great. He also has no longer has action delay or turn count on his first turn, which allows him to set up by popping off his EX into either his LD or his skill 1, or honestly you could go LD, skill 1, then EX or something like that. You can set up your traps and your kind of the way you want to control the fight with Trey however you want, which is really nice, rather than kind of being expected to sort of spin up over those first couple of turns. It's now a lot quicker, which is great. And lastly, this was maybe more important, his buff from his skills and his EX gives him weakness damage on debuffed targets. So basically anybody under the effect of his EX or LD debuffs, as well as HP damage up for himself. So Trey is hitting a lot harder, and this is a really, really nice upgrade for him. So I love using Trey. Next up, we will hit up, I suppose we'll hit up the new LD character. This one is Rydia, who, in addition to the usual kind of bells and whistles, her skill 2 and her EX and her LD now drop the Imperil debuff that she has, so water weakness, or water imperil, sorry, on the first HP dump that she does, which means that instead of doing all her dumps and then imperiling them, she will actually deal more damage because she'll hit them with it, she'll tap them the one time, and then she'll get the weakness damage on the rest of her hits. So she's hitting a lot harder. Her EX buff also gains the sort of Iroha effect of she does not use all of her Brave every time she does like a Brave dump. So if she, you know, drops a 100k on somebody, she'll only use up 80,000 of that Brave, essentially. So because everything is hitting, you know, 2, 3, 4 times, whatever, she's hitting a lot harder, a lot more consistently, which is really nice. As for her LD, it's a 4-use AoE attack that ignores defense, doing split damage, and on the first dump it puts her new debuff on them, which is called Water Weakness, which effectively makes it so that she can't be locked out of fights, as she is a character that is locked to a specific element. She now sets the enemy's elemental, you know, resistance, whether it's absorb or resist or whatever, or immunity. She now just sets it to weakness to water, which is great because she enchants the party with that, and you do not want them to just absorb everything that you do. So this is really, really nice, and it is very unique. She also gets a free skill use after the LD, as well as a new buff that lasts for, I think it's like 8 turns, might be 10. That is party attack, overflow, and HP damage up, all of which does more for Rydia than it does for the rest of the party. So she buffs herself more than everyone else, which is nice. She gets debuff start for her water weakness, and the LD itself, when you use it, grants the party 3 stacks of a framed 100% evasion buff that will only go down, has no duration, it only goes down when the enemy attacks whichever character, and it is a guaranteed you're not getting hit kind of thing, which is really, really nice. It's sort of like it's almost like a buff version of Pyramid, sort of, or better example, Kimari's EX debuff. It's the reverse of that. It's the buff version. I know that sounds really stupid, but just go with it. Then we got Ramza, who came in with the Burst Plus, and it is fire. Oh my gosh. So his only real changes for his rework, his Brave Plus now heals more. Okay, not like you're really going to be using it, because he just destroys stages. Oh my goodness. His LD attack now delays 2 turns instead of 1, which is great for setting up those full party launches. And the overhead, the what was it called? The grass flute, grass whistle, something. I can't think of the word. It now gains overflow, stolen overflow, as well as Brave and HP damage up for the party, which is awesome. Makes him an even better support than he was before. As for his Burst Plus, the effect gains, like, he already had the stat up for your attack, max Brave, initial Brave, and I think it was just those 3, that was based on the number of buffs that the party had that would scale all the way up to 90%, right? 5% per buff. Well, he got something very similar for the BT Plus part of the effect, which is Brave and HP caps up. So your party can deal the max damage they can deal on a single Brave hit goes up, as well as the amount of HP damage that they can do in a single hit, as well as their HP damage cap goes up. So your party is now able to hit way harder now. It scales all the way up to 36%, which is massive. This is, as a BT effect, essentially 36% Brave damage up. It's 5 stacks of it's better than 5 stacks of Kurosami's Call, and it's 36% HP damage cap up. So your party can hit hilariously high numbers. It is really easy with Ramza's, let's say his LD, right? It's really easy to hit 1.8 million damage off of that launch, and it's crazy. This is so strong. because especially since you can use it twice. Oh my goodness. Basically, this is the perfect burst for burst stacking, for stacking your effects. Lastly, we come to Zack. With his rework, his LD overhead gets buff start, which is nice. He also gets improved HP damage up for each of those stacks, which I think it scales to 30% now, I think. More importantly, he now gets to start the fight with his EX up, and the duration of the shield gets an extra 2 turns, so it lasts longer, which is very nice. As for his burst, the effect itself gives him the sort of Bosch effect of redirecting all AoE HP damage to himself, so your party members stay a lot safer. And it also makes him effectively immortal, similar to Arden or Galuf or Queen. And along with that, he grants the entire party his shields. So basically, when someone would take brave damage, if that brave damage is less than the amount of the shield that he has, then it's 0 damage. Like, the amount of brave damage that they actually take is reduced by the potency of that shield, which is absurdly good in keeping your party safe, right? It also grants brave and HP damage and caps up as well. So, as for the fight itself against Leviathan, which this was for Divine Leviathan, by the way, I forgot to mention that earlier. The fight was really... I don't know how to describe this. The fight was another one of the ones with a non-fatal orb, where the condition was, and the way they phrased it was, taking defensive actions, right? Which basically meant it would tick up if you dodged an attack, or if you were to reduce brave damage, right? So they're strongly encouraging characters like Zack or Rydia here, right? However, at different thresholds in the fight, the boss will summon adds. And the way that it worked was they would take incredibly large numbers of turns in a row. Like, it was not uncommon when I was trying to get this done for the bosses. The boss has 2 adds. They would get, 2 or 3 turns in a row, like back to back to back to back to back, right? So I don't know how other people did this fight, but what I did was I took Ramza and Locke along with Layla, and so every time they did an attack, which incidentally the orb itself was non-fatal, so whatever, but what would happen would be the boss or one of the adds would attack, Layla would dodge it, she would heal and battery the party, bring everyone up, and I would just do damage. And that was it. Basically, every time that they would act, I would get 3 turns. Then someone else would act, and I would get 3 turns. It was very, 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 very safe. Like, the fight itself, super easy. I did not have any issues with it. But I think that that is something that I will discuss a little bit later. As for my thoughts, I'll go into my thoughts on Zack kind of at the tail end of the cycle. But I think that Rydia made out like a bandit here with that water weakness, and Trey getting weakness damage on debuffed targets is also really strong. Like, he hits like a truck now, right? But I think the big winner here on this banner was Ramza, because his BT is incredible. Given that everything, like his HP plus is 4 or 5 dumps or something like that, it's just, oh, Ramza got the juice, right? Next up in the month, we have the Reins Lost chapter. Reins, really the only thing that he got here was that his EX hits harder, I guess. But the big focus on this one was Steiner. Steiner finally got his LD along with a rework. His skill 1 gets more uses, and the attack down debuff that it inflicts now lasts longer on the enemy. His EX upgrade gives him the buff from his skill 1 and skill 2, the chivalry buff. He starts the fight with that now, which is great, because you don't have to waste that first turn. and he also starts the fight with his EX charged. The attack itself now gets splash on both of the dumps, so it effectively like quadruples the damage, sort of, because it's a double dump attack now. And the EX buff now gives that extra attack to the entire party and also has party overflow. So he's doing a better job of like supporting the party. As for the rest of his kit, the only things of note were that his C65 got party brave gains up. And then for the LD skill itself, it's a 4-use LD, which is a big battery followed by multiple HP dumps that has full AoE damage on like the last set of hits. It starts out single target and then it goes to AoE basically, and then it grants a free skill afterwards. The LD buff itself is where things get really interesting because it grants party defense and HP damage and brave gain up, as well as HP damage taken down, so it helps make the party a little bit tankier. But it also grants HP regen, so this is really nice, and the sort of cryo effect off of her EX, where the entire party will gain a certain amount of brave at the beginning of any turn, whether it's your ally's turn or an enemy's turn. So this is really nice because you're getting some pretty nice, you know, 30, 40, 50k, however much batteries at the beginning of your turn. So it's allowing your party to not only stay safer, but deal a lot more damage. As for the fight itself, honestly, this was not that bad. The orb itself kicked on at the 80% mark, and it would go down by 2 every turn that you took instead of just 1. But it was a non-fatal orb, which, you know, I guess is okay. And the condition was that it would get +1 when you gained brave at the start of a turn. So theoretically, if you had Steiner's LD, this would go down at half the speed. So essentially you were probably going to get hit by the orb at some point, which, ugh, whatever. But the orb itself, the attack rather, it didn't hit that hard. It was a debuff cleansing attack. Not a big deal. As for the rest of the stuff that the boss did, it starts the fight with its recast and this like red aura. And while the aura is up, it has this big ass HP shield, and if it gets the recast off while that shield is up, it's basically an instant kill for your party. You're definitely going to be starting this fight over. So you needed either a way to kind of ignore that damage or shunt it aside or whatever, or a way to break the shield really quickly, right? And every time its recast would come back up, this would happen again. So it's a kind of, sort of, but not really damage race. Especially since the orb, you can't really properly tick it up, you know? And then at 70% and 30%, the boss would battery, and then it would get an HP regen aura, which is a real pain in the ass. But you could cancel it by getting a launch that had more than 200,000 HP damage in it. So really wasn't that bad. The recast attack itself, which this is the reason why it was such a pain, right? It's a big AoE attack that pops you with a framed speed down and action delay up. So it would take longer for you to get turns, and then when you got the turn, it would take even longer to get the next one, right? Did not like this. It took me a couple of tries to do this, just because I hadn't done the original fight on JP when this came out, so I was not familiar with the mechanics. The mechanics themselves haven't changed, right? So what I took for this was I took Ramza, and I took Steiner, and I took my Reins, who I think I had his LD, but I didn't max out his EX or do any of his character boards. at all. I took this to Lophinia Plus. Okay? You should start seeing a pattern here as we continue throughout the rest of the month. So next up in the month, we had Sherlota, who appeared alongside Selphie without any kind of event attached to it. So there's no fight or anything like that. There's no tickets to get. It's just, here's the banner. So to start with, you've got Selphie, who now her debuff that her LD inflicts, it lasts longer. And instead of ticking down every time you attack the enemy, it now only does that when they take a turn. So functionally it lasts way longer, right? The EX itself gives her HP plus 2 dumps, so she's actually able to do a little bit of damage, but why would you ever use this, you know? And it also gives her the buff for her skill 1 for the drain. It gives it an HP and Brave gain up functionality. So she's able to hit hard. Also, her C65 gets an extra use. That's what Selphie gets here. As for Sherlota, with her LD, she gets a new overhead that's just kind of there, similar to like Balthier or some of the other characters. It has no duration, never goes away, but it will display a number inside of it that's equal to the amount of Brave that Sherlota has been gaining, right? And it can increase to an amount up to 3 times her HP cap. So if her HP cap is 100,000, it will store this value equal to 3 times that, so 300,000, right? In this case. Now the effect itself gives party Brave damage, party Brave gain up, and party overflows up, which is nice, right? But the LD attack itself is where it starts getting a little wonky. So it's a 100% AoE gravity, so it turns everybody's Brave to 0. All the enemies, I should say, not yours. That would be silly. And then it deals full AoE damage equal to the amount that is held inside of that overhead effect, right? It will consume all of that Brave, so it'll zero it out. But it can go past her HP damage cap. So if you have that 300,000 Brave stored in there, she'll deal 300,000 damage, or, you know, whatever. And it will also grant you 3 uses of a special HP attack, and it will regenerate a use of her skill 2. The kind of special LD HP attack deals damage equal to that same value that the LD was going off of, but it doesn't burn all of that Brave, and it's a double dump with splash, and it will inflict her regular HP plus debuff, which now lasts longer and debuffs in AoE. The upgrade to her EX allows the buff to last longer, which is great, so you're not having to worry about it falling off. And when you use the EX, it's going to regenerate another use of that skill too, so you can kind of spam that a little bit more, which is nice. These are decent upgrades. So lastly in the month, we have the Anapro character event, where we get the new character and Reno gets a rework, as well as his C90. Reno here gets more uses of his skill 1 and skill 2, which is nice. His Turk Pride buff now grants party HP damage up, which is a nice boost to the sort of party support stuff that he got off of his LD boards. And then, more importantly, and this is very, very clutch, his LD now dispels 4 buffs instead of just 1. This is really nice. As for Anapro herself, this is going to take some explaining, so work with me here. Her skill 1 is an AoE attack that gives her a buff that grants attack, max Brave, and initial Brave, as well as Holy and Dark Enchant, a 20% chance to refill her EX gauge after everything that she does, and then it rounds the last 3 numbers of any Brave damage that she does up. So if she were to deal, you know, 12,476 Brave damage, it would just be 13,000 Brave damage instead. For the debuff that it deals, it's generic, well not generic, but it's framed, but it's Holy and Dark Imperil, as well as a 20% defense down, so it's okay. Her skill 2 is an AoE attack that summons the arm of her, essentially a Gundam, that does not consume any of her Brave, but deals a bunch of damage, so that's nice. Her EX grants her 2 stacks of an overhead, as well as does another AoE attack, right? This one, however, has high action delay, so she'll kind of delay herself a little bit. It'll take longer for her to get her next turn, and it will delete the target's next turn. So kind of give and take. The LD itself is a single target attack that, again, doesn't consume her Brave and has that same high turn delay. Her EX and her LD both grant her stacks of her overhead, and the way that her kit works is for her skill 2, her EX, and her LD, whenever she does them, she summons, I forget exactly what it's called, it's like Omega Robot Machine God or something like that. If you have any stacks of her overhead, then when it comes in, it will have its Brave equal to, I believe it's 5 times Anapro's max Brave. And if you do not have any stacks of that up, it comes in with 5 times her initial Brave. So, you know, it might come in with 100,000, but if you have a stack, it might come in with 300,000 or something like that. So it's a trade-off of a lot of extra damage, right? That's basically it. There's a little more nuance that goes into the robot that I just don't feel like getting into, but you get the idea. That's what the character does. The kind of noteworthy thing here for the character, I'm trying to get away from, you know, reviewing LD calls and stuff like that, but this one's kind of important. It grants that Holy and Dark enchant, which is whatever. It grants the user HP damage up, and it gives them that effect for, you know, however many turns that the LD effect is up, where they have a 20% chance of refilling their EX at the end of the turn. So this is really, really good for burst phases. You can crank out some really insane damage with that. Her high armor is attack keystone, leans in the HP damage, you know, direction. Makes perfect sense. I don't really care for Anapro very much. She's kind of weird. You know, her voice lines are really cool. I like them. They always make me, they make me laugh. But I can't ever see a situation where I would want to use her in a fight over basically any other character, because I don't need her to round up her Brave damage. I don't need her to have a weird robot that comes in and deals a bunch of damage. That part's cool. I do like Gundams, but I don't need a character that sets herself back on using her EX and her LD, which are supposed to be like the best skills that you have. You know what I mean? As for the fight, this fight was actually not that bad. This was fairly easy. The orb was dealing Holy or Dark damage, but it had to be at least 500,000 damage in one turn. And if you did both of those, it would go up by 2. And the way that the fight worked was if you ticked the orb all the way up to 20, which was the max, the boss would change phases, right? And it would open up. And while the boss was open, it would take 50% more HP damage. So this was a great time to burn the boss down. But after, I think it was based on the number of turns that you took, the book would close back up, and it would summon these 2 adds, which were effectively immortal, because no matter how much damage you did, they would fully heal themselves every single turn. And while those adds were out, the orb would come back, and the boss would gain 50% HP damage reduction. But this fight, another one, non-fatal orb, you could effectively ignore the mechanics of the orb and just burn the boss down really quickly by never letting the boss have a turn. So yeah, I believe what I took here was Anapro, Rem, and Sayador, and just blasted through it. This was very simple. So, closing thoughts. Here's where we get to the less great stuff. I think that the fights this month were a joke. you could pretty freely ignore the orbs on all of them, so you weren't incentivized to take teams that played to the fight's mechanics, but instead you would work around, like in Leviathan, the only thing you had to do was figure out a way to get past the fact that the boss and its ads would get, you know, tons and tons of turns. Just toss in Layla, and that becomes a strength for you. The Reins boss, as long as you can account for some launch, you're good. The Anapro boss, just don't give it a turn. You're good. This was bad fight design. There was no challenge. It was not punishing. It was just blah. And that actually goes into kind of my thoughts on some of the characters, in particular Zack. And this is going to sound like a pretty harsh indictment, and I can think of at least a couple of people that are going to give me a lot of shit for this. But I think that while Zack is a really good character, does tons of damage, he has all these great defensive tools and everything, what's the point? You know what I mean? I am recording this in September. I think we're supposed to get our next OP tomorrow, I think. And honestly, what's the point in Zack? You have all these tools to keep your party safe. You know, you can absorb, you can redirect all the HP damage to the party, you're now immortal, they take less brave damage. It really trivializes the challenge in fights where the enemies are really aggressive, right? But the enemies aren't aggressive. They're not dealing all that much brave or HP damage to begin with. So why would you need Zack? You know what I mean? I'm sure that as time goes on, we'll get more content where stuff like that is actually really useful. Big shout out to the story chapter of Lufenia, where you fight Kefka, because Zack was really, really good there. But during his own burst cycle, you really didn't need to take him at all. You could reliably blast your way through it with almost any collection of 3 characters. And I'm pretty sure this is not really a hot take. A lot of people were really dissatisfied with this month in Dissidia because we got a bunch of really cool characters that either finally got an LD, like Rydia, or, you know, got some kind of a rework or whatever, or, you know, they got a new BT Plus, or an upgrade to an existing one. So you had Zack, you had Ramza, later on you had Laguna and Terra. These are all fan favorite characters, right? But the sad fact is that with everyone's kits starting to get those same really similar upgrades, like they're really, and between that and the fact that fights aren't very demanding, they're not very difficult, this is, I don't want to say this is the worst month of content that I've ever seen, because it's probably not, but this is a bad month of content. And I'm sure that I'm not alone in that. That being said, maybe with time we will see that, you know, that's actually an ultra spicy, like nuclear hot take from me, and that Zack is the savior of Lufenia Plus or whatever, right? I don't know. We will see. But I think that Rydia is really fun. Ramza is absolutely busted. Trey is a lot of fun. Zack does trivialize fights because the bosses don't really have a whole lot of teeth to begin with, and he, you know, dulls those. Steiner is kind of neat, but I don't think that I would pull for him again, even though I do like my Brave Gain Up memes. Shout out to Alphino. Sherlota and Selfie, big skip. I got Sherlota's LD. I never used it. She's just, I think that this is a playstyle thing. She just doesn't interest me. Same thing with Selfie. Anapro, whatever. Hearing her go, oh, great. You know, it's endlessly entertaining. I laugh every single time she does it. And every time that the robot appears, you know, I start thinking of, you know, Gundam Wing. And people just screaming, it's a Gundam! Or whatever, right? But would I ever really use her outside of her call? No. Rena was really neat. I liked the upgrades that they gave him. It was nice to be able to see him doing real damage again. But overall, this burst cycle, not very impressive if you ask me. Anyway, so that's my retro for the Zack burst cycle. If you enjoyed this, do me a favor and like the video, subscribe to the channel for more content, And whether you liked it or not, drop a comment and let me know what you thought. Let me know how you feel about the sort of breaking it up into each burst cycle sort of format versus doing the whole month at once. And I will take that into consideration and see how it goes. But with that, thank you for watching. Take care.